Alright, so as not to let this video run away into some enormous size that I eventually then just don't post because I don't feel like editing it, Alexa, set a timer for 10 minutes.
10 minutes, starting now.
Title sequence. Alright, so I'm just going to read and respond to some comments to my most recent video. It was a video, I think, I haven't gone and rewatched it, but I think I was talking about Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug, and how I listened to him on a podcast, or maybe it was Nick Land. No, it was Nick Land. I was listening to an interview with Nick Land because I had been I had been listening to interviews with Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug, who was, along with Nick Land, like the two articulators, most known articulators of the neo-reactionary movement several years ago. And I was also talking about Urbit, which is a project that Yarvin is involved with. Although, if you want to ask him about neo-reaction, then you don't get to ask him about Urbit. He won't cross the streams, or cross the beams, as he likes to say. So, comment from Dan. Dan writes, thanks for the video, KMO. The terms used, capitalism, communism, liberal, conservative, means something that isn't reality. For example, capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state, according to Oxford Languages. What occurs in much of the world isn't this, but it gets called capitalism. It's a random collection of phenomena that favor an elite as they clamor to gather more wealth at the expense of everyone else. I won't go through the other terms I listed, but I think the discussion of capitalism, for example, like we really have that thing, is non-productive. At least the Dow would not be at $33,000 if we actually had capitalism. The people you talked about who are promoting acceleration because it might bring about the end of capitalism might be right, but we don't have capitalism, and what we have is more likely to morph into some other method of funneling riches to the elite that will still be called capitalism, then cease to exist. So, yeah, I think so. I simply wrote, I agree that capitalism is a slippery term at best and may be entirely without a real-world referent. I mean, the old command economies of the 20th century, with the exception of North Korea, have either embraced capitalism in practice, if not in name, or, they're not around anymore. So the Soviet Union, not around anymore. Russia, definitely capitalist. All right, I have deleted files. So, Alexa, set a timer for 7 minutes.
7 minutes, starting now.
Alrighty. So I started to summarize the notion of accelerationism as, well, quote, let capitalism do its thing until it breaks, and don't bother with all this leftist pushback, close quote. And Synchronium24 commented, I would say that this is a fair characterization of leftists that support accelerationism. Land is a supporter of the Dark Enlightenment, which is far-right slash reactionary. I think accelerationism would be far more likely to push in the direction of, though not reach, Land's goals than those of leftists, which would be reason enough for me to oppose accelerationism if I didn't already prefer the highly imperfect version of liberalism and capitalism in which I live to what non-accelerationist leftists propose. That's kind of complicated, but I mean, it's a sentence with many qualifiers. Nick Land is not an egalitarian. I think that's probably, the biggest consideration in his version of accelerationism, which, yes, as Synchronium says, is it's not the leftist version. It is definitely, he only cares about the fate of the elites. Most people are irrelevant to Nick Land. And, most people I don't know are abstractions. Why should I care about them? Except there's, some just moral intuition that says, You should. I mean, I'm not going to try to reproduce Kant here, but, he comes up with a grand logical argument for saying that you shouldn't treat other people as ends, that you should also consider them as ends unto themselves. Or you shouldn't treat people as means. You should treat them as ends. But, he also turns that rigorous logical facility to proving that masturbation is worse than murder. So it's kind of hard to take Kant all that seriously. But yes, there is this moral intuition that says people that I've never met, who live far away from me, whose lives are not visibly connected to my own, they're deserving of some consideration. As far as I understand Nick Land, he says that's silly. Don't worry about that. And, when we look back at history, we certainly don't know about most people. We know about the ones who were recorded as historical figures. So, ultimately, from the big perspective, from the pulled way back perspective, yeah, maybe Nick Land is right. What happens to me doesn't matter. What happens to Elon Musk, what happens to Xi Jinping, that matters. I don't like it. I don't have any immediate rejoinder for it, though, other than that whole moral intuition thing. Parker writes, the idea that capitalism will break seems similar to the idea of collapse in that there will almost certainly be no one large inflection point. There are trends, there are individual events. A company or industry may break just as a country or area may collapse, but neither of those things will make for the kind of change that the folks that talk about them are imagining. Yeah, I mean, this is the whole why I'm not interested in peak oil or the singularity. There's not going to be one single distinct inflection point that plays out over the course of a day or a month or a year that is going to be the defining moment in, for the rest of humanity or for the next 1,000 years or whatever, or even the next 100 years. Stuff is just, there's so many things at play, and systems that seem absolutely dysfunctional and brittle and already broken somehow manage to limp along for a long time. And systems that seem really robust, get into dysfunctional epicycles. And it takes a long time to play out. First, I'm sorry, man. We've recorded that long conversation. I can't find the recording. First writes, there's been an epidemic of leftists making their rhetoric as confusing and jargon-laden as possible sometimes. It's like they are almost competing with one another to see who can make things sound the most complex. They will always dig into history and grasp for straws for some of the most obscure names and figures in history. Just more reasons for the average proletariat to instantly tune out and drift from the left. Maybe this is intentional. Yeah, I think to some degree it is intentional. I mean, they don't want to be held to account, I wouldn't think, by the populace at large. So they speak in the language that, one, the populace at large is not prepared, to invest the time to understand, and two, that most people will just find off-putting, stylistically. And as soon as you encounter somebody who's talking to you in their in-group jargon and they can't break out of it to talk to you in normal language, that's a very good clue that you should put your hand on your wallet and back away, because they might be Scientologists, they might be members of something even more obscure and malevolent than that. Just back away. That's danger. Danger sign. Sean writes, hey, KMO, thanks for pointing out Urbit. It's new to me. I did a quick perusal of the website, and it looks like a kernel of a good idea. Something like this feels inevitable. Or I hope so. I hope it is, anyway. I have memories of the internet before AOL, and the time when we thought it would bring on liberation. The 90s. Was it a bit of a head fake then? I watched it all quickly get carved up into commercial fiefdoms, and every bit of data tracked and traced. It feels oppressive now. But with the right tools, I don't see why we couldn't all just walk away from how things are. Not quite a journey of zero distance, but not far. Although I feel you when you talk about being old and not wanting to mess with Urbit. I wind up doing so, however. If you wind up doing so, however, I'd love to hear your opinion on the actual experience of it. On the plus side, the interface and UI isn't junk, like most open source projects. Thanks for the video. All right, so I actually started to watch a technical video by Curtis Yarvin on the topic of Urbit, and I got like 15 minutes into it, and I thought, this is not for me. This is not aimed at me. The language here is not for me. But, you know, if enough people keep working on it, remember diaspora, or diaspora, however you want to pronounce that. It was supposed to be this alternative to Facebook, and it was going to be open source, and you were going to control your data. And they did a Kickstarter, I think it was, and raised a couple $1 million. And then the guy who was running the whole thing died under mysterious circumstances. Alexa, stop. All right, that's my key to wrap things up. But yeah, Urbit, or something like it, seems promising, and it's going to require a lot of work to replace the ease and functionality of things like Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, whatever you use. I mean, I'm largely getting pushed off of these things, so I have to go to the alt tech scene, and things like BitChute and Library, or Odyssey as it's called for video hosting, and MeWe, they're not as easy to use as the stuff with, you know, the multi-million-dollar corporations come up with. And I think at some point, we're going to have to, well, we don't have to, we have the choice of putting forth the effort to either build our own systems, which I'm not going to do, or use ones which are less user-friendly, you know, less convenient than the big boys, but respect our privacy, respect our, you know, rights to our own data, all that good stuff. I do it with MeWe. You know, MeWe is it's fairly usable, but it's not a replacement for Facebook by any stretch. I mean, certainly not all the people that you will find on Facebook you'll find on MeWe. Most of the people on MeWe, I don't know about most, but a fair percentage of the people on MeWe are people who get kicked off of you know, the mainstream platforms for wrongthink. So you do get a fair number of crazies there. I mean, just because the tech companies hate you, just because the I don't want to say SJWs anymore, but you know, the people I'm talking about, just because they find your speech unacceptable or some of your thoughts unacceptable, it doesn't make you smart and it doesn't make you right. You can be an iconoclast, you know, you can be a rebel and still completely nuts or just wrong. It's the two go hand in hand frequently. So, you know, just rejecting the mainstream doesn't mean that you found truth. I guess I'll leave it at that. Talk to you later.